Hello and welcome to Atheist Torah Study. My name is Emma Lugo. I'm your host. Today we're going to be discussing Parsha Miketz. The purpose of Atheist Torah Study is it's basically just a personal project of mine. I'm trying to understand the Torah through an atheist lens. And this is my cat. This is Muffin. Hello, Muffin. Say hi to everybody. Muffin's trying to understand the Torah too. Anyways, so I'm trying to learn more about the Torah, and I'm studying it through the lens of an atheist. I'm Jewish, and I've been studying the Torah for a number of years. I've always been an atheist, but I'm also a Jew, and maybe I'll try to explain sometime how you could be an atheist and a Jew. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but well, I guess I'll just do it right now. So my understanding is that in order to be Jewish, you need to study Torah, observe the mitzvot, practice immersion or mikveh. But I'm not sure that you need to actually affirm a belief in God in order to be a Jew. I'm not absolutely certain about that. So that's why, I don't know for sure if I'm Jewish. So according to Jewish law, you're Jewish if you've converted or if your mother was Jewish. Although in the modern system, your father could also be Jewish, or you could have a relative who's Jewish. So that's how a relative of mine told me that our family had Jewish heritage. And I was already an atheist at the time, but I was curious. And so I went ahead and tried to explore that heritage. I don't know if my relative was telling the truth or not. But I believed her. And so I decided that I would study Judaism for a while and get to learn about it. And that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years. I've just been exploring my understanding of what Judaism means. And I've been studying with a rabbi at a Torah study, and I got really involved in a synagogue. I became the president of the synagogue for 2 years. And I've learned everything that I could learn about a liberal Jewish community in the United States, which isn't the same thing as understanding what, for instance, an Orthodox Jewish community means, or what it means to be a Jew in Israel. Those are all very different kind of experiences of being Jewish. So I'm looking at it through a particular kind of lens. I'm not looking at it through the lens that I was raised Jewish. But I've always had a real interest in Judaism. I really have. But the whole time I've been an atheist. So I finally decided this year, after 10 years or so after 10 years of studying Torah, that I was finally going to do this for 1 year. I was going to each week, and I've been a little bit off on the weeks because I had surgery, but each week I was going to follow the Parsha of the week. So I'm just catching up right now. And by the time anybody sees this, none of this will matter anyways. Because if you actually watch this, you won't be watching it today. You'll be watching it at some point in the future. And it's kind of, as I've been doing this for several weeks now, I realize this is sort of like a video log. It's a little bit like a video blog. And so maybe this is also my first video blog, because I've never done a video blog before. I've been producing video and media for 35 years, but I've never done a video blog. I've done radio, and I've done television, and I've done print. But I never did this, and this is fun. I'm really enjoying it. Anyways, so that's enough about me. That's who I am. Way more than I ever intended to share, but it's early in the morning, so it's a good time to catch me. If you ever want to actually talk to me in person, come talk to me in the morning because I'm definitely a morning person. So, anyways, so back to the Torah. Okay, so today we're going to be studying. I just had it up. Where'd it go? Darn it. There we go. Parsha Miketz. And Parsha Miketz is more into the story of Joseph. We're in the middle of Joseph's life. So we'll get to that in just a minute. I'm back to telling you about Atheist Torah study. So Atheist Torah study is an in-depth exploration of the Torah through the perspective of an atheist. Each week I do commentary. I don't get through much of the Torah. I mean, I'd like to actually get through more of it. But it might take me a few more years of these actually to get through the whole text. So you're only getting a sampling of what's in the Torah. And you're only getting a sampling of what the world looks like through my perspective as an atheist. But I hope to at least give you an opportunity to hear what an atheist thinks about the Torah, what an atheist thinks about God, and what God means culturally to maybe to Jewish people, maybe to Christian people. It's probably a blending of both. And, like how an atheist who I don't ultimately, I mean, I don't reject, how do I put this? I'm not a religion basher, obviously. I mean, I'm not a religion basher because here I am reading a religious text. So I'm not a religion basher. I'm somebody who is trying to see what value there is in the gulf between, I mean, there's a big gulf, and of course, well, there's a gulf between atheists and theists. And it doesn't seem like our society has any easy way of easing that gulf. I mean, when I was growing up, it was pretty simple. Like the way that religious people saw the world was like if you were an atheist, then you were outside the folds of religion. And if you were an atheist looking at theists, you just said, oh, that's ridiculous, and then you would criticize it. So, I mean, as an atheist, I'm used to having that conversation with atheists all the time. Like, I'm almost never around atheists when they have anything good to say about religion. And I'm certainly never around atheists who ever talk about religion. I mean, my queer friends all want to bash religion. If the topic of religion comes up, they want to bash religion. And my atheist friends, of course, have nothing good to say about religion. But there's a certain, so if you really know a lot about something that you were raised with, I mean, I understand that you have a legitimate trauma response to being raised with religion. I mean, I have it too. I totally have it too. But it doesn't do any good in terms of communicating with theists to just bash what they think or to make fun of what they think. There's no point to that because all they're going to do is turn you off. But I mean, I don't think most atheists want theists or religious people paying attention to them anyways. So, I totally get it. That makes sense too. And, I mean, there's all kinds of people in the world. There isn't really any need for atheists and theists to talk to each other unless they really want to. Usually when you see atheists and theists together in a room, like on television or something, they're having a debate. They're debating something like, is God real? Or what's the roots of morality, which I talked about, on my last Parsha discussion. How can an atheist be moral? Different things like that. But they're not really talking to each other. And, like I said, maybe there's not a point to that. Sometimes you'll see religious scholars sort of talk about religious texts in a way that is sort of what I'm getting at. I mean, when I follow religious scholars like Richard Friedman, or the religious scholar who made me an atheist, Arthur Zanoni. I mean, I was studying with Arthur Zanoni in Minnesota, and he's the person who basically turned me atheist because we were reading a religious text, and I just realized, oh, this is all a bunch of BS, Boy, that was popping my bubble. That really did it. It's just like, poof, there goes God. It just disappeared. But, the thing is that when you're indoctrinated in religion, God never disappears. He doesn't go anywhere because it's like it's in your brain. Anyways, so let's go. This is Parsha Miketz, and it's chapter 41 of the book of Genesis. This is the story of Joseph. And I think where we are in the story is Joseph has been in prison. And while he's in prison, he has these dreams. I think that's where we're at. Let's see. Why don't we read just a little bit before that, going up to it? So the part before that is Joseph's in prison. Just to kind of catch up on the last one. Joseph. Right. Okay. So Joseph had been in. So here's what happened. Joseph got thrown into the hole by his brothers. His brothers made him sold him into slavery, and then he went to Egypt, and then he ended up working for an Egyptian official, and he ran the Egyptian official's house, and then the Egyptian official's wife thought Joseph was really good looking and wanted to make the moves on him. And Joseph was so innocent and so pure that he absolutely refused to touch the lady. And then the lady accused Joseph of, taking advantage of her. And the Egyptian official threw Joseph in prison. And so then he went back to prison. And I help teach, on a side note, I help teach Torah study at a prison. I go in with, hang on just a minute. Anyways, I help teach Torah study at a prison, and I go in with some of the other Jewish people from my synagogue, and we do Torah study in a prison. And by the way, at the prison, I'm out. I mean, I let everybody know I'm an atheist. Anyway, so we do this Torah study there. And, I always tell the folks who are incarcerated that, this Parsha, this last one, Vayesh, is, or the one upcoming now, is, extremely relevant to their experience as people who are incarcerated, because the Torah has a lot of sympathy right here for what the experience of being incarcerated is like. And it doesn't describe the details of being in prison, but it actually does really kind of get into it. And I have a real big spot in my heart for people who are incarcerated, because I do a radio show about this topic, and I've been producing it for about 10 years. I belong to a collective of people who produces radio about people who are in custody. And we cover all different kinds of aspects of the criminal justice system. So we do advocacy, we interview judges, we talk to people who are on the inside right now, we talk to people who are on the outside, people who are kind of trying to make a positive change in their life, and we talk about all kinds of issues related to imprisonment. We talk about the racist history of imprisonment in the United States. We talk about its origins. We try to come at as many angles as we can. So, like, for instance, a recent episode I had of my show, I interviewed somebody who is actually in prison right now. And it's actually relevant to exactly this story. And I didn't even think about it till right now. So I interviewed somebody who's in prison, and he actually wrote a book. He wrote a book while he was in prison, which is really amazing to me. What he and I asked him about this too, because I was really curious. I was like, how did you write a book while you were in prison? And what he did was, he actually wrote the entire manuscript for the book in prison. He got it to his girlfriend, and his girlfriend used Amazon.com to do self-publishing. And well, no, he used there's some kind of website to do self-publishing. So with the support of his girlfriend, he was able to self-publish the book, and then he put it on Amazon.com, and I think Books A Million or something like that. And the book is called The Prisoner's Dilemma. And the book that he got, the book that he wrote was, I mean, for him, it was therapy, because he's trying to write to other people who are in prison to help them have resources for surviving their experience too. And the part that's extremely relevant to this is that he got the inspiration to write a book while he was in solitary confinement, because he, according to his story, he told me he was sentenced at 18 to life, and about 16% of all people who are incarcerated receive life sentences, and a disproportionate number of those people are really young. Actually, just like Joseph is in our story. Joseph's really young, and he's been imprisoned. Anyway, so this young man was in prison when he was 18, and he had been put into solitary confinement several times. And his most recent experience in solitary confinement was he got put in solitary confinement for 13 months for having a cell phone. So, like, I'm recording this on a cell phone. Cell phones are extremely useful. I mean, I can't imagine living a day without a cell phone anymore. And, maybe I should be more sophisticated and more advanced in how I exist, but I do everything on my phone. And so I could understand how somebody who's in prison would want to have a cell phone, but they're not allowed. They're considered contraband. And he actually got put in solitary confinement for 13 months for having a cell phone. And, cell phones are considered cruel. I'm sorry. No, solitary confinement is considered cruel and unusual punishment. And anyways, so I'm rambling, which I'm prone to do. So hang on, I'm going to take just a little break, and I'll be right back, and we'll get into Parsha Miketz. So anyways, getting back to the story, Parsha Miketz. So in the story, after Joseph is thrown into prison, he has a dream, and then the dream that he has comes true. So he has another dream. So just like in the last Parsha discussion, I'm not going to get too much into dreams this time, although dreams are going to come up. Dreams come up like 4 times in this Parsha. So, whoever wrote this Parsha, and dreams are not that significant in other portions of the Torah, which is really interesting, because here there's not a lot of God in the story, but there is a lot of dreaming. And towards the end of the story, quote unquote, God shows up, but throughout most of the Joseph narrative, there isn't any God. There's just Joseph. And, the way that I think of this is like, it's kind of like the way that I think about like discussions in Judaism around what the oral tradition is. According to my understanding, Bereshit, Genesis, was the last book of the Torah written. And I think that as soon as we started, this is just my own personal pet theory, but I'm just going to use the word we, because anyways, but I could also use they. But anyways, as soon as they started to create a written tradition that was widely disseminated and understood, like, I think that as soon as there was a written tradition circulating, the inevitable problems of textuality made themselves apparent. And we've never really gotten past that because we have the same problems with the text now. So recently we brought in some people to our synagogue who do a practice called Torah. And Torah is where you take the Torah and you like change the genders of everything. So like because the Torah is so patriarchal. So the people who teach Torah change everything about it so that all of the names of the men are now the names of women, and the names of women are now the names of men. But they don't just change the names, it changes the entire direction that the text goes in. The text shifts so radically. And what they're doing, the people who do this, because these are like, these are women and feminists who understand, and people who want to do goddess worshiping, or who understand that their idea of a god is not separated from their idea of their bodies. So like your body as a woman should somehow be reflected in the text, and it's not. I mean, on the one hand, you could say that in the text, it doesn't matter what anybody's gender is because we're all, a little bit of everything. Or you could say, God is male and female and God is everything. Like that's, now as an atheist, I would say God is nothing. So if God is nothing, then God include that nothingness, in some way includes everything. So, or maybe not. Maybe that's, I don't know. There's probably a word for that. Like if you say that if God is nothing, then God is everything. There's probably some really good atheist criticism of that. So if there's an atheist who's watching this who can actually stand to watch this whole thing, and if you think that the idea that God is nothing is the same as God is everything, or no, I mean, if you think that that's not true, send me a message and help me understand it. I mean, so what I was trying to say was that for religious people who have taken the idea of monotheism as far as, I think, both contemporary Jews and contemporary Christians have done. Not all Christians, because there's a lot of different kinds of Christians too, and not all Jews. But I mean, I think that probably the way that most well-educated Jews who live in the West understand God, I mean, because you can't ignore that science is real. I mean, science comes along and it knocks over all this stuff. It knocks over the sacred pillars. But the pillars are still there. I mean, even if they've been knocked over, like people are still saying the same things, They still make the same arguments. I mean, the universe wasn't created out of nothing. That's like the most common one. The universe isn't created out of nothing. And who designed the universe? Who designed the laws of the universe? The designer. Who's the designer? And that's always where it's the God of the gap. That's like this idea. But I don't think Jewish tradition really approaches God that way anyways. I mean, I think that Jewish tradition has a different idea of what God is. And that's part of why I'm doing this, because I think that we've been wrong all of this time about how we understand the idea of God. I mean, I think that God is not a universal phenomena. I mean, I think there's something called the worship of God that is universal across the human species. But I think that what that God means is not universal. I mean, I think that it very clearly changes from one generation to the next. And I think that the way that God changes is really clear in the text, you know? And I think that it should be clear now in, you know, modernity or post-modernity, whatever we're at, that like every God is a different God, you know? I mean, I think that there's probably some shared cultural understanding of a monotheistic God in like different places. But even within that place, like their understanding of what their God is really shifts according to what somebody's need is. I mean, I think that the idea of a God is there to help people fulfill a need. I mean, no matter what, it's all happening in your head. And I think that as the need changes, the God changes. Because even if you say that God isn't an image, even if you say that God isn't, you know, an icon or a fetish, the God is still always the same thing. The God is something intangible that you really have no direct experience of. So it's a creative act. It's a creative cultural act, and it's there more than anything to fulfill a need, whatever that need is. And to me, that's what the God is. Even for an entire culture, you know. So the need to the need that that Jews and Christians and Muslims and even Hindus and maybe Buddhists, I'm not sure, but the need that different people have to arrange their society in order to accommodate the idea of the God isn't really about the God. It's really about the need to organize the society, which is what I think is so interesting about Yuval Harari's talk. I'm so sorry I missed that. Because in his book Sapiens, he really gets into it. It's really brilliant. Anyways, this is the longest introduction I've ever done to Atheist Torah study because I haven't even started on the text yet. So I am going to do that, but I'm going to take a little break first. And when I come back with some more coffee, we're going to get through at least, I promise, like 20 verses of text. Hi, I'm back. All right, so now for Parsha Miketz. First, we'll do the blessing for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech ha'olam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzvanu lasok v'rei Torah. Chapter 41. Miketz. After 2 years' time, Pharaoh dreamed he was standing by the Nile. So here's, in this story, Pharaoh is a figure, I mean, which was obviously well known to everyone at the time, and, you know, in contemporary times too. Everybody knew what Pharaoh was. So it was, that was an easy place to begin. Or to put somebody in a story. You put somebody in relationship to Pharaoh because everybody knows what Pharaoh is. After 2 years' time, Pharaoh dreamed he was standing by the Nile. And oh boy, he's standing by the Nile. Oh boy. Sure, Pharaoh's standing. Of course, he's the king of Egypt. Of course he's standing by the Nile. Where is he going to be standing? By the Amazon? By the Euphrates? You know, he's going to be standing by the Nile. Anyways, in the dream. After 2 years' time, Pharaoh dreamed he was standing by the Nile. When out of the Nile there came up 7 cows. This is so all of Joseph's dreams. I think this is like by far the weirdest dream. I mean, he has some strange dreams. It's like Joseph is, yeah. Anyways, but this is the weirdest dream. Okay, so there's 7 cows. They're in the Nile. So it doesn't say what kind of cows they are, by the way. And that's really interesting because cows have changed over time. So their idea of what a cow was may not have been the same as our idea of a cow. Like, I mean, I think that when we think of cows, we think of like those, those black and white cows from Wisconsin or something, the ones that everybody gets their milk from. That may not have been what this kind of cow was. As a matter of fact, I remember I studied this once, that there is an ancient ancestor of today's modern cows that came from that area, and that cow was domesticated. But it was, I think their cows were pretty big. I'm not sure. Boy, that would be really interesting though to study the history of the domestication of the cow in the ancient world, because that's kind of where cows came from. That would be really interesting. Anyway, so there's these cows, they're in the river and they come up and they're handsome and sturdy and they grazed in the reed grass. Okay, so there's one set of cows. And then in his dream, 7 other cows came up from the Nile close behind them, ugly and gaunt, and stood behind the cows on the bank of the Nile. Then the ugly, gaunt cows ate up the 7 handsome, sturdy cows, and Pharaoh awoke. It sounds like, anybody who's having a dream about cows, besides like a cattle farmer or just a farmer, is like weird. Like, just the fact that like the Pharaoh of Egypt, who, is probably, and what does it mean to be the Pharaoh of Egypt? Also, what does that mean? I'm really interested in that. I'm really curious. Like, what does it mean to be the Pharaoh of Egypt? It means that here's my theory about how the whole thing happened. So here's my theory. My theory is that in the far past, with the development of the city-states, the priestly class arose as, well, I don't know. It's hard to know. Like, how did the priestly class, or when people got together? There's so much we don't know about the ancient world. This is the problem. I mean, the Pharaoh, who is like the religious head of state and the national head of state too, is, I think that in Egypt, you have a merging of the priestly class with the king. So with the ruling class. I know that my understanding is that there was some separation between the two. But these two elements seem to be a consistent theme throughout the ancient world, right? I think that's the point that I'm trying to get at. Because you even had that in Rome. In Rome you had the religious class, like the Eleusinian mystery cults. And then you had the ruling class, which was the head of states, which was really kind of the people who had the most power in the military. So you had, of course, now in the ancient world, they didn't have the kind of understanding of the articulation of divisions of power that we have today, but they were quite sophisticated because they had the same brains as we have. Well, that could be argued, actually. We don't really know that. That's interesting because if the idea of God changes over time, maybe the idea of brains change over time too. Like, maybe how people used their brains back then was not the same as how we use our brains now. I mean, what evidence do we have to say anything that we know about the internal subjective experience and its meaning of any ancient culture? I mean, what evidence do we have? We don't even understand our own culture and its meaning because we don't understand each other. We don't understand we don't really understand that well how I'm probably sounding like an idiot, but what I'm trying to say is we don't understand that well how our brains work and how the kind of meaning making that we engage in as a we can, this is where science is useful. I mean, I think that through science we can look at ourselves objectively and we can say that we as different groupings of people are following patterns that are recognizable and understandable that can be studied scientifically or at least quasi-scientifically. So I think we can understand that. But like we can't explain. I mean, this is what got me into religion in the first place, is all of these questions. Because and into school too. I mean, because I love academics also. I love both of them. I think that people have this like hope that somehow religion is this great shortcut to get to the answers to these questions. I mean, like one of the questions that was floating around in my head for most of my childhood, because I grew up in the 70s when the bomb was still a thing. Well, it's still a thing now, by the way, just in case you didn't know. The bomb is still a thing. But back then, the bomb was kind of it was a new thing. It was this new layer of experience that people had to add on to everything everything else about the world. And there was this, everybody had seen what an incredible trauma Hiroshima and Nagasaki were. And like, I still think that most people don't really understand what Hiroshima and Nagasaki really mean. But we all kind of understood the implications of it for for nuclear war. And so that first and second generation after the development of the bomb was kind of like, that was like the young generation when it came to what is now one of our new realities, which is living with the threat of like mutually assured destruction, this idea that we can actually do something so significant that we can like really ruin our environment for like all people. I mean, and it's like, it's related to this idea of Pharaoh, which is why I'm rambling on about this, because we've never resolved these issues that go all the way back to ancient times. We've never really resolved this this gap between how, like when we first began to form city states, how did we distribute power? Suddenly we had agriculture, and we created these fields of wheat that we cultivated that allowed people to live much more sedentary lives. And suddenly they had all this time on their hands. They weren't busy like either chasing animals to eat them or running away from them or just they're still busy surviving, but the margins of survival had just grown so much. Now I wonder if the development patterns that we went through as animals, once we're kind of like living in captivity in a way. I don't think that, I think like when you look at the body is meant to move around. It's like this thing, it's supposed to move. It kind of has a function that exists in an evolutionary context, the same way that all bodies do. It's basically a lot of dressing for passing on genes. And suddenly we've invented this new luxury that never existed before in the entire history of the planet. This new kind of luxury of time and of interconnectedness and of language and problem solving. So we have all of these complex. I mean, can you imagine what was going on in people's heads 6,000 years ago? Because I mean, our story is a long story. You know, it doesn't just start 6 or 10,000 or 12,000 years ago. I mean, that's when we started to really become aware of what we were. And in the process of people becoming aware of what we were, we've gone through so many incarnations because almost every society of its time thought that it had created an answer, like it had some kind of answer, like it answered these big questions about the world through its gods. You know, the gods were like a placeholder for not having any universities, not having the internet, not having answers. But the thing is, we still don't have answers. We still have a lot of questions, and we don't have answers. But I mean, when we're looking at the universe, we see the void. I mean, we really see what the universe is. I mean, and when I say the void, I just mean like most of the universe is the cold, vast, dark, empty vacuum of space. You know, I mean, when I say the void, that's what I mean. Now, I know there's a lot of stuff in between there, and I know the universe hasn't always been that way. I mean, I understand that early in the universe's existence, at least according to our understanding of it, everything was actually very condensed. And it was a very different kind of universe. Maybe our particles, and maybe our religion, and maybe this idea of God is some kind of longing on almost a molecular basis to get all of these atoms and all of these particles and all of this energy back to the initial state that set it. So like when the universe exploded, it didn't explode, but when it expanded and it went through this incredible transformation into stars and the building blocks of complex life, maybe the idea of God is this longing to return to that point of origin before there was any complexity, before everything was dissipated. Maybe it's a longing to come back to that point. Who knows? Who knows what it is? We don't know what any of this stuff is, which is what's so interesting to me. I'm back. Anyway, so this whole thing was a long, rambling spin-off of the idea of Pharaoh. But, you know, the reason I did that was because we don't really know. I mean, we understand the idea of Pharaoh, but what do we really understand about this idea? Like what is a head of state, you know, and how is it understood at the time? And what is the story telling us? Because the story actually has all of these clues, and these clues are in the structure of how society is organized. And since this is just a story, the person who wrote the story must have had an intention in their head. I mean, in a way, what we've been doing for the last 2,400 years is we've been riding the wave of the invention of popular and widely disseminated literacy. Like, as soon as literacy became something that could be widespread and that could be widely disseminated within a culture, it began to be contested because the stories, which, and this isn't any different in a way from how people do storytelling tribally, but there's something about language, there's something about the words that fixes the meaning. So when you have a bunch of people off doing storytelling in like different parts of the world where they have to kind of evolve their own traditions, they're going to be doing storytelling. When you have language, the language fixes the meaning and the meaning gets frozen. And by having the frozen word, even though, I mean, I understand words change over time, but even before words change, you're already taking a meaning and you're freezing it on a page. And you're saying that that frozen word on the page now has some meaning that can extend beyond the page into your life. And so the power of the text reverses itself. Like when we first write down text, what we're doing is we're trying to liberate our consciousness. You know, there's something in the neural activity in our brains that we want to get onto paper, you know, for whatever reason. Another kind of storytelling. So we want to get whatever's going on in our brain onto paper, onto the computer, whatever. But as soon as we've done that, it's frozen and it has a narrative quality that then when we go back and look at it again has become its own world. And so now the part of us that is engaged in storytelling, that part of us that like is maybe really old, I don't know, but whatever that part of us is, that maybe it's not even storytelling, maybe it's just the way that we trust and mimic our parents or whoever is our primary caregiver. Like we definitely have an inborn capacity to learn that is part of how all species evolve. I mean, species evolve, the young mimic their elders, their parents, their caregivers, their nurturers. And they have a pre-programmed trajectory that they're supposed to follow in order to survive and reproduce. And that's the fundamental evolutionary drive, right? That's the only way we know that we're still here after 500 million years. I mean, before that, there were some other ways of doing things. There was the bacteria floating in the ocean. There's photosynthesis, but, you know, we're not photosynthetic. We rely on photosynthesis, you know, to get a lot of our nutrients, but we're not capable of that ourselves. And we don't have the same capacities as trees. You know, this is how we do it. And so that's our story. But within the story, we write the text, right? We write the text, whatever it is. Say you're just writing in your diary entry, or you're doing a letter or something. So you write the text, whatever you're intending to write. The text becomes frozen once it's been written. It comes back to you when you're looking at it. And the text is another, it's not you. The text is another thing in the world. It's this intermediary. It's not alive. It's not dead. It's just an object. But it's an object that can unlock this incredible puzzle of language if you've been taught how to decipher it. So you write a letter, and then you have the capacity to decipher your letter that you've written, and it suddenly becomes this big mystery box. It's so much more than you could possibly imagine it is, because that's what this is. This is somebody wrote a letter. That's really what this is. Somebody wrote down this story, which is probably like when you really sit with the text, with the story of the cows and the Nile and the Pharaoh, and you think about 2,400 years ago, 2,300 years ago, there's no internet, there's no democracy, there's no modern medicine. There isn't any going to university and studying. I mean, well, there was a little bit then. That's actually part of how this came about. But the technologies that we all think are so great now that just make our lives so comfortable, none of this existed then. And language was something that only a few people had a mastery of. Only a few people really were literate. A very small percentage of the society was literate. And so the people who were literate were kind of special. They were special people. And they were creating these things in their time and in their place, which then, unfortunately, became a blueprint for all literacy. Because we had evolved enough as a culture to where we could have widely disseminated, widespread literacy within an entire culture, but only a little bit, like even all the way through the Middle Ages. Now, I don't know what literacy rates were in Jewish communities. That's something that would be really interesting to know, because I have a feeling literacy rates were a lot higher in Jewish communities than they were in other neighboring and adjacent communities, but I don't really know that. But I would like to know that. That would be really interesting to know. Anyways, I've only got a few minutes left, so I'm going to try to get through a little bit more text here. I was talking about Pharaoh and the dream that Joseph had. So the ugly, gaunt cows ate up the 7 handsome, sturdy cows, and then Pharaoh awoke. He fell asleep and dreamed a second time. So now he's having another dream. But it's just, so he's going to have a repeat of the same dream, but it's just going to be a different dream. 7 ears of grain, solid and healthy, grew on a single stalk. But then close behind them sprouted 7 ears, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin ears swallowed up the 7 solid and full ears. Then Pharaoh awoke. It was a dream. So that's another, Pharaoh's just having these tripping dreams, like he's on MDM or something, because it's like he's having psychedelic dreams is what I'm trying to say. I don't know anybody who has these weird dreams where they're dreaming about corn, and then there's starving corn, and the starving corn eats the healthy corn. But writing about dreams must be really interesting. This is the writer here decided to write about dreams, and he's imagining. The writer's kind of imagining what kind of dreams the Pharaoh would have in the story. It's a very fanciful thing, isn't it? To imagine, you can't really, the writer is projecting into the Pharaoh whatever he's imagining the experience of the Pharaoh is. And it's like, who can know what the experience of being a Pharaoh was like? Maybe it's a little bit like being English royalty in the Middle Ages. I have a feeling it sort of was, but who knows what it was like? It must have been very interesting. And so this person is imagining the experience of being a pharaoh, and he's imagining a pharaoh's anxieties, and he's telling the story of the pharaoh's anxieties in a dream. It seems to be a unique human obsession, doesn't it? Human beings seem to be obsessed, even here, just like here in the story. Human beings seem to be really obsessed with whoever has a lot of class privilege, whoever has a lot of power. And they kind of project themselves into the world of that person, which is a lot of what the Joseph narrative is about. A lot of the Joseph narrative is there's this power, and this power is so significant, and here's this individual, and their story is sort of being projected into it. It's very interesting. I mean, I find it kind of I don't know. It's it's too bad he's not. It's too bad the Torah is like. It's too bad the whole Joseph narrative wasn't about like somebody just really ordinary in the Torah that like you know, had the same kind of ability, or this who had the same interest. But you know, this is telling us. This is telling us a lot. I mean, it's telling us that times have not changed that much. You know, that the motivations of the writers of the Torah had at the time, and the worldview that they saw, it hasn't really changed that much. Like, it seems like, and maybe it's that this kind of text reproduces these kinds of realities, you know, which is a great argument that atheists and all kinds of people around, you know, throughout modernity have made about these religious texts, that like religion reinforces the privileges and powers of the ruling class. You know, religion is used as a tool to cultivate respect and fear and admiration for the ruling class. You know, and that ruling class, it could be the kings or it could be the priests, or sometimes they're the same thing. You know, whatever that quote unquote master is, it's just, you know, it's an ordinary person who, through this weird, not completely understandable process of the dissemination and distribution of power that has been going on for about 10,000 years, has led to this person, you know, suddenly having some sort of privilege over the other people, even though we know on a gut level that like there's just absolutely no truth in any of that, because we know that. I mean, I think we know science. You know, this was an area. I'm not going to have time to get into it. Sorry. Oh, there's so much here. Anyways, well, you've been listening to Atheist Torah Study. My name is Emma, and this week I was rambling on around Parsha. Let's see, which one were we? Miketz, I think. Parsha Miketz, the story of Joseph. And the story goes on like Joseph has a really interesting life here. He dreams about the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh comes and somebody hears about Pharaoh's dream, and he has these dreams, and then he hears that Pharaoh's interprets dreams. He hears that Joseph interprets dreams, and so he comes to Joseph and asks him to interpret the dreams, and Joseph interprets the dreams. All the dreams come true, and Pharaoh like reorganizes his entire kingdom based on Joseph's dreams. So in a way, Joseph is kind of like who's that guy from the Russian? No, I can't remember his name. What was the name of the guy who like was a friend of Peter the Great, and was friends with the Russian czars right before the Russian Revolution? This is kind of what Joseph is here in a way. He's the soothsayer. He's giving advice, but it's not. Joseph wasn't wanting to do this. He just kind of got pulled into it unwittingly. Anyways, it goes on, and then Joseph becomes big, like second in command of Egypt, and there's so much to talk about, but I'm not going to get to it. Anyways, if you'd like to contact me, you can write to me at atheisttorahstudy@gmail.com, and you can also follow Atheist Torah Study on TikTok for as long as it exists, and on YouTube. So thanks again so much for watching Atheist Torah Study, and we'll see you at the next Parsha.